Otherwise, welcome to STEM 40. STEM 40, the dot point we can see here, planning and training a year. The terms we need to be familiar with is periodisation. There's some different phases of the competition, the pre-season, which we've touched on in STEM 39, in-season and the off-season phases. Sub-phases is another thing that we need to be familiar with, where we're talking about macro cycles and micro cycles. Peaking and tapering, and then we look at some sport-specific sub-phases. We're looking at the fitness components and how they interact. The thing that you're required to do in this STEM is develop and justify a periodisation chart of the fitness and skill specific requirements for a particular sport. So we're looking at the fitness or the conditioning and the skill specific requirements of a particular sport, but you need to justify the periodisation of that. The first area we're going to look at is planning a training year and periodisation. So periodisation is when we divide the year into different aspects or different areas of the year. So periodisation, we'll just make sure that you have a good understanding of that. Within periodisation, you'll also need to consider peaking, which is when the athlete is going to try to get to a point where they are performing at their best at certain times of the year. The other aspect of that is over a long year, some athletes will continue to train. To achieve the goals that they've set throughout the year and maintain interest and the ability to keep going. Periodisation is something that we need to encourage and have in our training programs. The example of the cricket team training throughout the year, whether that's they train through the winter, you can see that in all sports today, major sports today, that there's quite a lot of important training that does take place within the months that they're not actually playing the competition. In the reasons we do that is to develop fitness or maintain fitness and skill levels. The periodisation is, as I said before, dividing the training program or training year into different phases. The training program for most athletes can be broken into three distinct areas of the competition and the training year. The first of those are the post-season, then the pre-season and the end season. That will be fairly consistent throughout all teams and all sports. The post-season is a transition phase where the reviews and looking at how to best prepare for the season that's going to follow. Following that is the pre-season, where the athletes will enter the preparatory phase. So it's specific things that they've identified they're going to assist them to improve for the upcoming season, which we call the in-season, and that takes place with competition or the actual participation of the athlete in their sport or their activities. In the post-season training, there needs to be a lot of variety for the athlete that needs to take place. But having said that, there are some major things that need to happen. First is we don't want them to come back into the next season carrying more weight or being in a position where they've gone back or experienced a high degree of reversibility. So we don't want them to gain weight. We want to prevent that. We want them to maintain their aerobic fitness, and we do that through low intensity activities. We want them also to maintain strength, and if there can be some increases, that'd be great. But again, remember it's a maintenance phase. We want them to look at skill levels, and a coach might suggest areas that they would go away and work on during this post-season area. Injury repair is also important because they've come out of the previous competition, so we want them to repair any injuries, and often that's a time when surgeries will take place for professional athletes. We also want them to recuperate physically and mentally so that they are prepared for the next season. You can see the example there, the tennis player. Variety, one of the training principles, is something that needs to be considered so that the athlete comes back refreshed and they feel like they've had a break. whilst they may well have kept active throughout this time. During the pre-season training, this will take place usually 8 to 12 weeks before the start of the competition. This needs to be planned out very strategically by the coach and the fitness coordinators of the teams or the athlete. We're looking at some specificity where we're looking at the predominant energy systems in the sport. We're trying to develop those during this time. And there's the major difference is where we've changed, or the pre-season training has a lower intensity. During the pre-season, we're changing that. We're looking at changing from low intensity, high volume training into high intensity training, so that we can employ the progressive overload principle. And this would also incorporate a low volume training at the start of this and increase and progressively increase. Skills are also incorporated into this. It's important that they are incorporated, but you'll see the importance of developing those fitness components that are going to be used for the season that's about to begin in 8 to 12 weeks' time. Again, the major change is changing from low intensity to high intensity training. The in-season training, the general aim of this section or this aspect of the year is to maintain the fitness and the strength and the skills that have been developed during the pre-season. The athlete will have a high focus on preparing for the competition, whether it be a weekly or a monthly or a fortnightly competition, but the athlete should consider that in all the training that they do, as well as the coach in the planning of this. Consequently, the skills and the strategic planning need to increase, and opportunities in the training sessions need to be afforded to the players so that they can actually practice the skills and develop, if it's a team sport, the team tactics and strategic planning that would be employed during the competition. The volume needs to be at a point where there is not reversibility occurring. So if the volume gets too low or the intensity gets too low, then the player could be put at risk of losing the benefits that have been gained during the pre-season. We've mentioned the skills, that they need to be important and consideration. There is an exception to athletes who don't receive game time. So there may be a player whose minutes may be down. They would need to increase their intensity and volume of work so that they can get to the level that the players are playing at. So when they're asked to play, that they're not going to be experiencing difficulties to maintain the skills and the fitness required because they haven't been playing the minutes each week. Two important terms that we need to be familiar with is macrocycles and microcycles. Macrocycles are training blocks, and they would fit into the training year, but they usually last for 3 to 6 weeks. They will incorporate and look at when the phases of the competition take place, and look at what games are more difficult or perceived to be more difficult. You might also incorporate things like representative commitments that may be placed upon your players if you're in a situation like that. Microcycles are smaller blocks. They usually last for a week, maybe 10 days, and they, again, allow for the coach and the trainer to look at the volumes and the intensities to allow the players to maintain or to recover from the different competitions in which they're participating in. They will also look at, as I said earlier, the aspects of what happens during the stages of the year. They'll also incorporate during the transition periods or the post-season, that'll be lower impact and lower intensities and lower work volumes possibly. Term that you need to be familiar is unloading phases. They occur within the macrocycles, and they're a decrease in the intensities to allow players to gain the benefits as we keep moving through the training year. Here we have a plan of the training year. I'll let you have a good look at that yourselves. It's important that you become familiar with it, but you can see it's a yearly training program. The green is the preparatory phase, or the pre-season. We've got the competition in the pink, and the blue section is the off-season. You can see how that training year has been divided up. The macro cycles along this line here, how they've been incorporated, and also the microcycles. The microcycles, each of the training sessions or each of the weeks that are going to be carried out, there'll be information added into there. Down here in the orange, you can see the requirements that the athlete is required to have to incorporate well into the sport, and there's been some planning done for each of those components of fitness and the mental and the tactics side of things there. That needs to be also considered. They've been actually put into this training program, which is good. You can see the intensities that have been carried out, and that is in increases and decreases in respect to the aspects of the training year. That consideration has been taken place. That's the volume, the blue one. The pink line here shows the intensities, and they will again incorporate the requirements that the athlete has throughout the training year. And then we can see down here again the training sessions as recommendations about what needs to be put into the training sessions for the athlete. 50% conditioning, 30% skill and tactical. Through to, if you look at the differences here in September, where there's conditioning is 20%, makes up 20% of the session, skill 20%, and tactics. So that reflects the different aspects of the year. This is a good program you need to be familiar with. Term we need to have a good grasp of is peaking for performance. The coach and the athlete and the trainer will hopefully look at the requirements and look at the training year and take into consideration when the athletes need to peak, because they can't be at their peak every week of the year. So that needs to be planned out. The example that we may have here is for rugby league player, the finals and the grand finals are going to take place in September, so we want them to be considering that. Coaches will change the training program, look at the in-season aspect of that, and allow through the training program design the opportunity for the athletes to develop and peak. So, as we mentioned a second ago, the athlete can't be at their peak all the time. It's a temporary state. It involves the physical and the psychological aspects of the athlete. When they're at their peak, you'll see this from the athlete: good health, the being adaptable to training. They're able to get through the training session. They have quick recovery from the training session demands. They're able to adapt to stresses that may be placed upon them by the coach or the games that are in place. They'll have self-confidence in what they're doing, and they'll have high motivation, aspirations. They're things that you, as a coach, will see if the athlete is prepared to, and is in a state of readiness for peaking. To allow an athlete to peak, we need to be familiar with this term, tapering. The taper or the tapering period is a reduction in the demands placed upon by the coach or the trainer of the athlete. So, decreasing the volume and intensity of training. You may choose to reduce the volume but maintain the intensity. That's probably a measure that would be seen a little bit more than reducing the intensity, particularly as you get closer to the high points of a season. The taper will vary from sport to sport. A taper of at least 2 weeks is recommended for swimmers, for a period of 1 week for runners. So those have been designed depending on the event or the activity in which the athlete is participating in. But tapering as we've mentioned, is a reduction in the demands placed upon the athlete to allow some recovery and some regeneration of both physical and mental preparedness for the upcoming event. Sports-specific subphases, fitness requirements and skill requirements. The phases of the competition require different approaches in order to effectively prepare the athlete for competition. The preparation phase, which we know as the pre-season training, begins with general conditioning. It'll develop to later stages where there's more emphasis is placed on the skill and the strategies that take place. The competition phase, again, is marked by an emphasis on skill and strategy development, whilst they will continue with specifics of conditioning for the sport, so they'll maintain those. Much of the conditioning that takes place that's required at this time of year can take place through intensive skill practices and small-sided games where the athletes are put into situations where not only are they developing their skills, but they're also developing their fitness levels. There's a high interest for most athletes in those types of activities. It's important to mix conditioning and skills practice during the competition phase. We don't want the players to become burnt out. And planning should emphasise different aspects of the macro and micro cycles, even an individual session. So you might tailor individual sessions for certain athletes or positional aspects that can be incorporated into specifics for the athlete. What we want to do here is have a look at the following figure and explain what's happening within the 8 weeks for both the skill and the conditioning. Please do that in your book. You will look at the orange being the skill, the purple or maroon being the conditioning. You can see increases and decreases in intensity. This aspect here will be interesting for you to have some analysis of. And finally, in groups, develop and justify a periodisation chart of the fitness and skill requirements for a particular sport. Draw this chart in your book and complete. Thanks, boys. That was STEM 40.